Every year, there's a new group of rookies that are joining your dynasty rosters, and you're faced with the difficult decisions of what players should I drop?
Right.
What players should I hold? Well, in today's video, we're going to help you make some taxi decisions, some roster decisions. We'll talk about players that you should absolutely cut, move on from them, or players that, hey, don't give up just yet. Maybe find a way to roster them. Do us a favor. Go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you like Dynasty content. And let's just start, Badaki, with some quick context, because context is crucial.
Absolutely.
We're going to be approaching today's video from the perspective of a 12-man start 10 Superflex format.
Correct.
Okay? Now, get this. If you're in a 1 quarterback 8-man, you probably would approach some of these decisions differently than if you're in that, type of format. Same thing could be said if you're in a 16-man start 12, right? I mean,
Correct.
A lot of these guys are going to stay on your roster. It depends on how big your benches are as well. So we're coming from that perspective. Standard 15 to 20 bench spot. Let's start, Badaki, with the obvious keeps.
Okay.
These are names from the 2023 class that we don't really need to talk about. There is really no format in which these guys are dropped. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, A-Rich, Bijan, Gibbs, Spears, A-Chan, that big, really impressive wide receiver group as well from last year. And then obviously those tight ends in Kincaid, Laporta, and Michael Mayer. We don't need to dive into that, but they will not be mentioned today because they are very obvious holds from last year's class.
Absolutely.
But into the quarterback room. So there will be 3 categories for each position: keeps, on the edge, and drops. That will be green for keep, orange for on the edge, and red for drop. Take us through that quarterback room then. Who is some quarterbacks that you are definitely keeping on your roster?
Yeah, for me, I'll keep it simple. There's really only 2 players that I am 100% keeping on my roster currently right now. As you can probably see, Will Levis and Aiden O'Connell are my only 2 quarterbacks that I feel really comfortable in investing and keeping and seeing what's going to happen. Obviously, I know the Titans do have a top 7 pick. So does the Raiders. They are within the top 12, top 15, and there's talk that they can move up. But if that doesn't happen, both of these guys could be starting quarterbacks going into the 2024 season. And that's what is exciting when you think of Will Levis and Aiden O'Connell. Or maybe they do draft a quarterback. Either of these teams draft a quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round, hypothetically, and there's more competition. Still, there's opportunity for these guys going into this year. So both of these guys are my must-keeps so far on this list.
I'd 100% agree. And, Will Levis could be a buy. I have a feeling they could go offensive line with that 7th overall pick.
I think so as well.
But I think they could go one of these weapons, one of these wide receivers, if Neighbors is there, if Adunze is there. Because if you heard the way that their new head coach is talking about this offense, he wants to build it and basically around weapons, helping Will Levis develop the same way that they did in Cincinnati for Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. So don't be surprised if they get a Neighbors and Levis actually becomes a buy at some point.
Absolutely.
Now, Aiden O'Connell, I totally agree with you. Those were the 2 names that I was keeping. By the way, in Aiden's last 4 games, the Raiders went 3-1. He threw 8 touchdowns and had 0 interceptions. I don't doubt that they're going to bring in competition, but Aiden had a great quote about that when they were, the media was asking him, how do you feel about competition? Would you be okay if they brought someone in? He said, they should. This is the NFL. It's the best of the best. I should compete for the job. And he goes on to talk about how at Purdue, he was never the clear-cut starter. Every year he was fighting for that role, so he's used to it. He's ready to compete. So I agree. Those 2 in a Superflex format, got to stay on your roster. I have one player that's on the edge.
Okay.
And it will depend on the size of your leagues. It'll depend on how long you can keep a player on the taxi squad, how many taxi squads you have. That is Hendon Hooker. You and I did not draft. I mean, I was looking through my leagues. I have no Hendon Hooker in any league anywhere. And I think that was because you and I were talking last year. We just felt like Jared Goff was going to get an extension. We didn't see him playing poorly to the point where they would move on from him. So it seems like he will get an extension this offseason, Jared Goff, that is. And then Hendon is kind of put in this position where unless Jared is injured, he's probably not going to get a shot to be a starter on that team. Now, look, if you're in a league that has 6 taxi spots and you can hold players for multiple years, what's the harm in keeping him? Because if an injury were to happen to Goff, I feel very confident that Hendon could step in and be a very good fantasy quarterback with the weapons around him. However, if you're in a format where it's like 10-man, you don't have many bench spots, and you have to make some difficult decisions, I do think it's okay to cut ties with him. But he was my only on the edge player. Every other quarterback, I was like, you're gone. Badgett, Tommy DeVito, fun story, you're gone. Jake Hayner, Clayton Tune, Jaron Hall, like all these guys, sorry, I don't care what the format is, don't need you.
Yeah, and look, for me, I do have Hendon Hooker as somebody I am dropping. The only one I can I do have kind of on the edge would probably be Tommy DeVito, and that's a lot of what ifs, right? If the Giants don't draft a quarterback, they say Daniel Jones is going to be the starter, and they hypothetically get a veteran an older veteran quarterback that we're not expecting, a Josh Dobbs, a Gardner Minshew. Depending on the time that they do sign, insert veteran quarterback, maybe Tommy DeVito does get a start or two, but that's just if you have a Daniel Jones type of situation, if you are still holding on to him. But other than that, I would say I can easily cut him depending on your situation. But yes, regarding Hendon Hooker, I personally don't want to keep him. I just don't see him getting a start at all unless Jared Goff does go down. I mean, he took this team to the NFC Championship game. They did lose. He will get the contract extension, in my personal opinion. Maybe that's a 2-year, a 3-year. He still has the opportunity to play really good football. So I think Hendon Hooker at the moment, in my personal opinion, is a dead asset.
I totally hear you. Like I mentioned, I mean, it depends on your roster sizes, but if you have to make a tough decision, I'm fine to move on from him.
Right.
Did you hear the report that they expect Daniel Jones to be good for the start of the season?
Yes, and I mean, we heard that last year with if I'm not mistaken, there was a lot of mixed reports with Kyler Murray saying that he should be ready. I
don't think anyone said that about Kyler last year, dude.
Look, maybe I could be wrong, but I guess I'm going back to the quarterbacks I remember tearing their ACL, the Kyler Murrays, the Joe Burrow.
Sure.
Joe Burrow tore his ACL really late into the season, and he was ready. I'm not necessarily sure, and I have a really good feeling that the Giants could potentially trade up for a quarterback.
I think they could.
And it just all depends. But yes, look, once again, Tommy DeVito, like you
I
said,
almost feel like
story.
the scenario, the pathway for Tommy for me is less about injury, and it's more about if Daniel Jones comes back and they don't draft a quarterback and he's playing poorly, what will the city of New York do? Will they ask for Tommy? So that's I think his pathway, because people did love the story.
They loved the story,
but
100%.
Anyway, let's move on to the running back spot. Really deep running back class from the perspective of the amount drafted, but not necessarily the amount that have been effective. Let's start off with who are the obvious keeps in your opinion, Badaki.
Yeah.
Again, 12 team Superflex, start 10.
Yeah, so I have about 5 to 6 running backs that I think you should be keeping here. Zach Charbonnet. I'll say the names and I'll kind of break it down. Zach Charbonnet, Kendre Miller, Roscoe Johnson, Chase Brown, Keaton Mitchell, and Jaleel McLaughlin. Obviously, all these guys, in my personal opinion, do have a pathway to still find success. And we've seen glimmers of success with these guys as well. Obviously, Zach Charbonnet, we've seen him have a little bit of a sprinkle here, when Kenneth Walker did go down. A new head coach, a new offensive coordinator, a new regime here. Maybe they do favor Zach Charbonnet a little bit more over Kenneth Walker.
Well, they've also said that they want to establish the run big time.
Exactly.
With McDonald there. So
so Zach Charbonnet, so much more can happen going into the 2024 season. Maybe that's a 60-40, a 50-50, whatever that looks like. We could potentially seeing Zach Charbonnet getting a lot more opportunity going into this year. Kendre Miller, probably one of our favorite, most buy low opportunity type of running backs right now in the community. Zach and I have brought out multiple videos of Kendre Miller saying you should be trying to acquire him because the Saints are probably one of the worst cap situations. They owe, if I'm not mistaken, Alvin Kamara over $15 million going into 2024. Maybe he is a cut casualty here or a trade option, for Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints. And Kendre Miller can easily step into this opportunity. We saw him take the reins here in the last game of the season, scoring over 14 fantasy points, scoring a touchdown. We've seen how he can be a use in this offense here, and somebody that we both love going into the 2024 season. And look, I think the same thing can be said with Roscoe, Chase Brown, Mitchell, and Jaleel McLaughlin. All those guys have seen glimmers of opportunity. If their front runner running back does go down, all the opportunities for them, specifically Chase Brown. Obviously, Joe Mixon could potentially be going to another team here or be a cut casualty. If not, we've seen him get opportunities in the second half of the season with Joe Mixon there. That's what's really exciting about this offense. So all these guys, I think, have opportunities that you should be keeping on your roster.
I agree. I think Chase Brown is definitely one of those names that is not being discussed enough that should definitely stay on your roster. All the players talk about, by the way, are from the 23 class today. Mm-hmm. But I had another name on there, and it's not because I believe in this guy. I mean, if people were on this channel last year, they know that I was actually the opposite of what seemed to be consensus, which was sell Travis Etienne. You have to sell Travis Etienne because Tank Bigsby's in town.
Yeah.
No, we bought Travis Etienne last year and it paid off. But I would still put Tank Bigsby in the strong hold category myself. And a lot of that just has to do with the draft capital, to be honest with you. If Etienne was to go down, I do think Tank Bigsby would be next up. They'd give him every opportunity to win the job, despite him playing very poorly with the limited opportunities that he has had in Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. I didn't like this prospect. I didn't like this player. But still, day 2 pick on the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm still going to be holding Tank Bigsby in most formats. And if people are willing to drop him, I definitely think I would just add him, especially the landscape of the running back position right now. Think about how many running backs came out of nowhere last year and became performers for your teams. Jerome Fords of the world, right? Think about Jerome Ford, Zamir White towards the end of the season, obviously Kyron Williams. So do I believe in Tank Bigsby? No, but the draft capital is enough for me to hold on to him for another year. It's the same regime there as well that decided that he could help them. He didn't help them in year 1, but I'm still willing to hold on to him at this point.
Okay. The only reason I'm hesitant right now, he is on my edge player at the moment, is because if I'm not mistaken, when I was trying to find the information, maybe you do have it. When Etienne, I think he was out for a series or he was out for like a quarter and he was injured for some reason. The next person that stepped up was actually Dearness Johnson.
Yeah, it was.
And that's what's concerning to me. And I do believe Tank is a better prospect than Dearness Johnson. I do believe he should be getting the opportunity over him. Maybe they didn't believe in Tank at the moment, at that time. Maybe he wasn't healthy and we didn't know it, right?
There was, in my opinion, just no trust there at all. Tank had every opportunity to build trust, and he didn't. And, you think about it, well, when Cam Akers went down last year, when he was in and out of games, wasn't really Kyron, right? And I know Kyron was injured as well, but he didn't have like this full trust given to him yet either.
Right.
So I definitely hear you. I'm not even like sitting here saying Tank Bigsby is going to be an important part of people's rosters at any point. I'm just saying that the draft capital, it's the same coaching staff there. We've seen plenty of coaching staffs. Hey, it takes a little while to gain my trust. You haven't gained it yet,
Yeah. I mean, he started off rough as well.
It started off awful. I think he had, 2 fumbles in his first game or something?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. He fumbled, I think, one of the first carries or one of the first 5 carries
on the goal line.
Yeah, and it was... that genuinely could have changed his whole fantasy season if he didn't fumble and actually scored, potentially.
Yeah, it could have.
That would
but yeah, I mean, I think like a guy goes down, you want someone you can trust. I bet you they would have liked to put Tank out there, but they couldn't trust him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get it. Now let's talk about players that are on the edge. I have 4 names.
Okay.
Israel Boniconda, Amari DiMercado, Chris Rodriguez, and Zach Evans. Abaniconda, because at the moment there is really no one behind Breece Hall, and obviously there's a history of him being injured. I think that offense is going to be much better as well with Aaron Rodgers next year. I think the minute they draft the running back, the Jets, that is, if that were to happen, that's fine. We can move on from Abaniconda. But if they go throughout this draft cycle and free agency and they don't add a second name, I will be happy to hold him and just see if he develops. DiMercado had a couple opportunities when James Conner was injured this year. I would have put him as a strong hold, but they
Okay.
did bring in Michael Carter, and it seems like Michael Carter's probably going to play the role that DeMarcado would have if Michael Carter wasn't there. They've also spoken highly of Michael Carter. Chris
Right.
Rodriguez got some opportunity. No Antonio Gibson. He's going to be a free agent. Does Rodriguez step in place to be the, spell back for Brian Robinson? And then Zach Evans, it's probably just ignorance. I don't want to drop Zach Evans. I loved that player.
Oh gosh.
And
We got to cut loose.
we
brother.
have seen Sean McVay use running backs a year after he did nothing with him.
Yeah.
So there's no reason, I think, to drop Zach Evans at this point, unless you just like really have to make room for your roster.
Right. Look, that makes sense. I understand. For me, I have Izzy as a drop. So is Zach Evans. I also have Amari DeMarcado as a strong drop as well. I think there's too many mouths to feed in that backfield, and I know James Conner's still there, and the Cardinals technically do have an out. But if they draft a young running back, that can be from Blake to not to Tank to Braylon Allen to Jonathan Brooks to Trey Benson. If any of those I would say my top 6 to 7 running backs in the 2024 class goes to this Arizona Cardinals team, I think it can instantly have, Amari DeMarcado.
Oh, yeah. If they drafted any running back, DeMarcado would be unrostered.
Yeah, a Lloyd, a Bucky, all those guys can Jalen Wright, all those guys. Amari DeMarcado can be a fat GG's there. There is one other player I did have on this list, once again, based off pathway, based off situations. If the Giants don't sign Saquon Barkley, I doubt Matt Breida is a long-term question. I doubt Eric Gray is a long-term answer as well.
Yeah.
But if they don't sign, if they let Saquon Barkley walk and they get a veteran running back, which I think will probably be the dumbest thing, hypothetically, they get Austin Eckler, or that would just be really upsetting as a Giants fan. Or they can go a little bit younger with the Joe Mixon. I think Eric Gray, they still wanted to implement him, and we saw that in the last game of the season. Obviously, it was a blowout against the Eagles in Week 18.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm not hard-pressed on keeping him whatsoever because I can understand that anyone that can come in, it can be Derrick Henry to Devin Singletary. Eric Gray can be instantly dead as well. So just a thought process there if you guys wanted to wait until after the NFL draft.
No, I think that makes sense for sure. I was looking at Gary Brightwell because he's still a young player for you, right?
He is. He got injured this past year. He was a big special teams guy. He was a big punt returner or not kick returner for a while, but he got injured early in the season. I think he went on IR, and they tried to use
December
Eric Gray.
23rd. Mm-hmm. Or sorry, October 23rd.
Yeah.
He went on IR.
So Eric Gray, they tried to replace him as a special teams guy. Just didn't work out. I think he's more of a heavy hitter, running between the tackles type of back. So just all depends on the pathway of Saquon Barkley and what's going to happen there, to be honest.
So Deuce Vaughn, I feel comfortable dropping personally. And I agree. I know Tony Pollard's a free agent, but it's not a player that you and I were really interested coming into the draft last year. It's a fun story, but ultimately, what role is there for a player like that? Hey, maybe we eat dirt and people are like, no, it's year 2. He's going to break out. Watch out. Pollard's gone. I don't think so. I think they're going to add to the running back room. I think if you were to ask every GM in the NFL, what team do you really believe is going to add running backs to their roster? I think they would all say the Dallas Cowboys.
100%.
And I also put Evan Hull there with JT signing long term.
Agreed.
Dwayne McBride, who had every opportunity to take over that backfield, didn't do anything. And then the rest of those guys there go unexplained. We're about to get into the wide receivers, but we just want to let you know that version 3 of our 2024 rookie report is coming out in about a week's time.
That's right.
We'll have all the information from the combine, new profiles added. You can see here version 1.0. You'll be getting version 3.0 very soon. If you want to dive deep into this class, get our rankings, get all the features in the rookie report, then go ahead and use the promo code LAND, become a Mother Flocker member. You can check out the pinned comment rather. Let's get back to the video. Who are the wide receivers that you are keeping regardless of roster.
Yeah, regardless of roster, for me, there's a lot. Quentin Johnston, Jonathan Mingo, Marvin Mims, Jalen Hyatt, um, Andre Osivis, Demario Douglas, Josh Downs, Michael Wilson, Dontavion Wicks, Parker Washington, and Trey Palmer. I really like all those guys. I think all those guys could potentially have a pathway to success. Obviously, you guys know I love Quentin Johnston. Loved Quentin Johnston last year. I still believe there's a pathway if they do not draft either Brock Bowers or Malik Neighbors. Either way, that might be a GG's for Quentin. And I think all the same thing can be said with each and every one of these guys, right? The pathway is there. Jonathan Mingo could have opportunities. Just didn't see it last year. Marvin Mims, one of the first offensive players for Sean Payton. What's going to happen with Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton? He might get a new quarterback. Jalen Hyatt. Do they not go Malik Neighbors? And they draft a quarterback, hypothetically. Jalen Hyatt automatically could potentially get bumped up there on the quarterback play. Andre Eusebius, he goes obviously with the Cincinnati Bengals. Tyler Boyd is going to be gone here in a couple of years. Apparently, he is a free agent. They're letting him go, and they tagged T. Higgins. That could be interesting. Demario Douglas, a new quarterback. I mean, once again, the list goes on for each and every one of these situations. We saw Parker Washington step up in the second half of the season. Michael Wilson had one breakout game last year with Josh Dobbs against the San Francisco 49ers. That was incredible. Obviously, they're probably going to be drafting Marvin Harrison Jr., so this might be somebody that you can put on the edge once Marvin Harrison Jr. is drafted, or does Hollywood walk, right? Like, a lot of things could potentially happen. Dontavion Wicks, somebody that came out of nowhere for the Green Bay Packers, and Jordan Love. So all these guys have opportunity to find success, and all these guys, in my personal opinion, are worth rostering at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much the entire list. The only players I think I'd like to dive into deep are the Cincy wide receivers.
Yeah.
But I agree. Johnston, terrible rookie year. You hold on to him.
Yeah.
Michael Wilson, Love, Wicks performed well. Parker Washington could step into opportunity. Trey Palmer, the sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm.
Douglas, got to be on your rosters. Let's talk about Andre Yeshivas and Charlie Jones, because in my personal opinion, I get the indication that T. Higgins is returning.
I mean,
obviously they franchise tagged him. They're looking
yeah.
for a long-term deal. If T. Higgins does indeed re-sign for this team, I'm not going to say Yeshivas is like a drop, because he was like on the edge for me originally.
Yeah, that's fine.
He's certainly not a drop. He had a pretty impressive week 18. He had 7 targets, 5 catches for 2 touchdowns. So he's shown flashes.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he fits in this offense with Higgins healthy. I do think, however, that Charlie Jones, if I was to choose between one of those two names, and I know this is probably not consensus or whatever, but if I was to choose between one of those two names, Andre Yeshivas, Charlie Jones, I actually might lean towards Charlie Jones because he's the natural replacement for Tyler Boyd rather than Andre Yeshivas. Last year, Yeshivas, I believe, played about 85% in the slot. Charlie Jones played 70% of his snaps in the slot. Small sample size, but we know he was a slot primarily player in college as well. I think that was their plan all along was, hey, we love Boyd. This is a last hurrah no matter what. Let's get Charlie in there. Sure, he might not be the same level of player as Boyd is, but let's give an opportunity to develop in year 1, and we'll see what happens in year 2. Could be wrong. Hey, they could draft another slot wide receiver this year, right? And Charlie Jones is irrelevant. Probably makes Andre Yeshivas even more relevant too, both of these names, right? Wouldn't be surprised if they went out and drafted someone in round 2, round 3, an X, a slot. Who knows? But if they were to sign T. Higgins long-term or just on the franchise tag and they don't go heavy after wide receiver, then I think Charlie is actually a little bit more intriguing to me because of his slot usage. So I just wanted to also talk about those two names, see where you felt about Charlie Jones, because if we're keeping Yeshivas, we're keeping Jones too.
Yeah,
for me.
And why not? I would agree. I did have him on the edge, but as you're talking about it, I can definitely see both pathways there. I think the only reason why I gave Andre Yeshivas the edge was because of that week 18 when we saw, him getting a little bit more utilization, and maybe that's just because it's week 18 and a lot of people were resting or whatever the case may be.
Fight for Joe was injured.
Exactly. So I kind of like the way they wanted to get him utilized compared to, if you were to compare both stats, Charlie Jones called 3 for 3, just under 50 yards, over 9 fantasy points, wasn't amazing, but Andre Eusebius, 20 points, 2 touchdowns, 5 out of 7
I wonder what
targets.
that would look like if Boyd was injured.
And at the same time, though, like, oddly enough, both of these guys are a little bit bigger than Boyd, or one of these guys, Andre Eusebius, is a little bit bigger than Boyd, and then Charlie Jones is a little bit smaller. So they've utilized a above average size slot type of player in a Tyler Boyd, who is 6'2", 203, versus Andre Eusebius, 6'3", 212, or Charlie Jones, 6 foot 188. So it just depends on who they believe in more. So I do agree. Both of these guys are probably must holds until we figure out who's going to be that wide receiver 3 coming into this year.
And again, everything is context. Guys, if you're in a 1 quarterback, 8-man league, start 8, you're probably not keeping these names, right? These Cincy wide receivers. Now, let's talk about guys who are on the edge.
Okay.
There are quite a few names that I would find it difficult in a 12-man superflex to let go of right now, but I didn't give them the green light because I don't think they're necessarily like elite players by any means, or like elite prospects.
Right.
Of course they're not. Trey Tucker from Las Vegas, the Raiders. He came on in a big way to finish the year. Remember, he's the kid out of Cincinnati they drafted later in the 2023 draft. He had some big games, including Week 15, where he put up 2 touchdowns versus the Chargers.
Yeah.
The reason he's not a green light for me is just because where does he fit? Adams isn't going anywhere. They have been very vocal about that. Jacoby Myers was just signed. If anything, Michael Mayer is due for a breakout.
Yeah.
So with a team where we have questions around quarterback, it's difficult unless you have a large roster to really bank on that.
I agree.
Tyler Scott, I wanted to talk about as well. I think he's sneaky. I think he's a really sneaky ad. Tyler Scott, another kid out of Cincinnati. Darnell Mooney's a free agent. I don't think that the Bears are going to re-sign him. Now, last year, Tyler Scott played primarily outside, but that's because Mooney was, playing inside. We expected Tyler Scott to be a slot receiver in the NFL, and I still think that he could. Round 4 selection was in the mid 4.4s at the 40-yard dash. I think he's got that vertical ability to stretch the field that Mooney was giving you. He's not the same player, but I do think Tyler Scott, let's say they go Caleb at 1, right? And then at 9, none of the wide receivers that they want are there, so they go offensive line. They could still add a wide receiver in round 2 or 3, but there's a scenario here where Tyler Scott's your starting slot wide receiver, and you've got Caleb Williams as your quarterback along with DJ Moore. Right. So I do think he's a very sneaky pickup. A.T. Perry, Keishon Butte, Xavier Hutchinson, Ronnie Bell, the other guys that are on the edge for me. If there's anyone that we've talked about you want to discuss there, or agree, disagree, I don't know.
No, I think all those guys, all the rest of the guys, I don't have as a hold. So I do have Tyler Scott as an edge player, but I think I am not hard pressed, even if I'm in a 12-man league, because I would say how incredible this class is. If a wide receiver that we like goes in the 4th round, and then he goes to the Bears, I think he instantly jumps over Tyler Scott personally, right?
I definitely agree, but it depends on what role they envision, because they need a Y and a slot.
Yeah. So hypothetically,
so it depends.
Yeah.
If Javon Baker's going to the Bears, Tyler Scott still has a role for me.
Okay.
But, if they put like a Roman's not going to go that late, but let's say round 2 they go Roman Wilson. Okay, yeah, Tyler Scott's dead.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of where I have him. So he's not hard pressed for me. But everyone else, I would say, I think the names that you named, Ronnie Bell, those are all cuts for me. I forgot the guys that you named. The rest of the guys.
The clear cuts for me are Darius Davis, Justin Shorter, Jake Bobo, Xavier Gibson, Elijah Higgins.
Yeah, exactly.
There's literally no reason to roster these players.
Agreed.
In any format. All right, looking at the tight end position, who are the players that are green lights for you?
Yeah, for me, I'll keep this simple. I only have 4 tight ends that I'm willing to keep here. And that is Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave, Luke Shoemaker, and Tucker Kraft. Actually, Michael Mayer is somebody that
Mayer's
we are
an obvious keep.
So Luke Musgrave, Luke Shoemaker, and Tucker Kraft. So both of the Green
Okay.
Bay tight ends I am keeping. I feel really confident in, no question about it. I don't necessarily think that, we saw when Luke Musgrave went down, Tucker Kraft kind of stepped up and had his opportunities at some points in time there,
Yeah.
especially with that quarterback play in Jordan Love. But I think Luke Musgrave is the number one tight end there with a little bit of splash of Tucker Kraft. If
It's almost
that
annoying,
really,
isn't it? Knowing that these guys could have been very successful on, their own teams.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, I guess this is what the Packers been wanting,
Yeah.
some depth at all these positions, the tight end
Yeah.
and the wide receiver position, which looks like they've successfully done.
Yeah.
So that definitely makes sense here. And then Luke Shoemaker, obviously Jake Ferguson is a number one guy in this offense. But if Jake Ferguson goes down, Luke is the next guy up, in my personal opinion, right? Like, I don't see another pathway for another tight end over Luke, somebody that they just drafted, a big body tight end, 6'5", 250 pounds. They like those big tight ends that can block as well. I mean, Jake Ferguson has done a lot of blocking. He's also 6'5", nearly 245. So I think that's something that I'll feel really confident in. If, once again, Jake Ferguson goes down, maybe he misses 5-game stretch next year, Luke steps into that role personally.
Yeah, I agree with those three names. I would add another name that's a green light for me. This is, I think it's probably the cheapest asset that you can add for free on your waiver wires right now in most dynasty leagues. And I'm probably going to make a video about him here next week. Davis Allen, the tight end for the Los Angeles Rams. The kid out of Clemson, 6'6", 245. Keep in mind that Tyler Higbee tore his ACL, MCL last year. I don't think, from what we have heard, he's going to be ready to start week 1. He's also a 31-year-old tight end. The last time I can remember a tight end in the 30s tearing their ACL was Zach Ertz and Logan Thomas. That didn't work out very well for those guys.
Right.
And if there's any coach, that I would trust to extract something out of their draft picks, it's probably the guy who just made a 5th-round pick in Puka Nacua, the best rookie wide receiver in NFL history.
Right.
So Davis Allen is probably going to start the year as a starter for the Rams. He had some flash games when Higbee went down. In week 14, he had 15 fantasy points, 50 yards, and a touchdown. In week 18, he caught 4 targets for 25 yards. So, not a lot to go off of just yet, but he's a nice big athlete. And I think they're excited about him being their starter here in 2024 and potentially growing into that role. So I would say Davis Allen is a strong hold for me as well, with those other names.
The only reason why I didn't have him on the list, I think, is because there's a lot of mouths to feed there now. You saw the emergence of Puka. You saw the emergence of Kyron Williams. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is there. Davis Allen can find some opportunity, but not something that I personally believe is going to be of a consistent value, potentially, unless Cooper Kupp tears his ACL and there's no one else to step up there, right? Or whoever.
I hear you, but Cooper Kupp doesn't replace the tight end targets.
I agree.
Offense.
I agree. I think,
and also he's just not the same player that he used to be.
And when I think of Tyler Higbee, that wasn't somebody that we were starting on a week-to-week basis. That wasn't somebody that we were relying on, that we were hoping that he was going to be getting
not this year, but in the
targets.
same Sean McVay offense when Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp were both dominating.
Great. He was great.
He was, a top 10 wide tight end in multiple years. So
yeah,
I think Davis steps into that role, and I just don't think that because those wide receivers are there, the tight end position is now not going to be utilized.
Sure. Look, anything can happen. I can definitely understand. Could be wrong. Not somebody I'm personally holding, but if you guys, anything can happen.
Yeah.
Anything can happen with these guys.
On the edge, Cameron Latu, only name for me, and I don't really even know if I want to hold him. I'm just talking about him because he did get good draft capital from the 49ers, and George Kittle, we don't know who's going to be the odd man out. If they sign Ayuk, and they've got Ayuk and Debo and Kittle, all to long-term deals, along with paying one of the highest paid running backs in the NFL.
Yeah.
Like who is the person who's going to be on the edge? And I'm not going to sit here and suggest it is Kittle, but in deeper formats, I think he's a fine player to stash on the taxi. But obviously in slimmer formats, he's probably the first name I'm cutting of anyone in the orange.
Yeah.
So far in today's video.
Yeah, I'm not hard pressed on keeping Cameron Latu. I think there is a pathway. I actually wonder what George Kittle contract looks like when you think about him potentially moving on. So they do have an out on Kittle this year, but the dead cap is $18 million.
Yeah,
that's pretty significant there. So maybe they write it out, or they do cut him and they find some value somewhere else. But yeah, I think I'm not hard pressed of keeping Cameron Latu personally.
Strange, Darnell Washington, any of those names after that, we are not interested in keeping at this point. But that's the end of the video. Do us a favor and go ahead and hit that like button to show some love.
That's right.
But we'll see you guys soon. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.